formed us, you made us carefully. 'Cause in the end, we're all your children. Help me to love with open arms like you do. A love that erases all the lines and sees the truth. Oh, that when they look in my eyes, they would see you. Even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love. So let all my life tell of who you are, and the wonder of your never-ending love. Oh, let all my life tell of who you are, that you're wonderful and such a good Father. That you're wonderful and such a good Father. Help me to love with open arms like you do. Just like you do, Lord. A love that erases all the lines and sees the truth. You have for me. Oh, that when they look in my eyes, they would see you. Even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love. Even in just a smile, they would feel the Father's love.
Living a life to surpass imagination, giving a call to a world in desperation, offering all that I am in adoration. Lord, to be yours, Lord, to be yours. I'm in a strong, it's on, I can't stop the flow because you changed me, rearranged me. Gotta take a minute. Nothing I know could do me, so I gotta let go and tell you why. Living a life to surpass imagination, giving a call to a world in desperation, offering all that I am in adoration. Lord, to be yours, Lord, to be yours. Now you gotta be real and feel it, walk what you're talking, be a tower of living Holy Spirit, full of the measure of Jesus Christ, and when His love shows, then you know you're living a life to surpass imagination, giving a call to a world in desperation, offering all that I am in adoration. Lord, to be yours, Lord, to be yours. Be yours. I let go, broke free from the things that have held me up. All of my fears give way to the arms of love. Living a life to surpass imagination, giving a call to a world in desperation, offering all that I am in adoration. Lord, to be yours, Lord, to be yours. Living a life to surpass imagination, giving a call to a world in desperation, offering all that I am in adoration. Lord, to be yours, Lord, to be yours. Let no one caught in sin remain inside the lie of inward shame, but fix our eyes upon the cross and run to Him. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling over death by death. Come awake, come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Christ is risen from the dead, we are one with him again. Come awake, come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Beneath the weight of all our sin, you bow to none but heaven's will. No scheme of hell, no scoffer's crown, no burden great can hold you down in strength. You reign forever, let your church proclaim. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling over death by death. Come awake, come awake, come and rise.
Can they like turn to that? Let's go back.
Dude, my coffee is like modern buttons in it.
You were dropping 8, you were picking up. We were picking up. There's a blue car that's a little, I know, so I didn't. I did the record. $2 for Z. Yeah, that was great. Just, telling him that it's not like commitment, where you're like stuck for the rest of the year. I think it's good. Kids are kids. Kevin over here is like,
All right, good morning, everybody. If you want to find your way to your classes, no matter how hard I try, it's always a minute or two off, Dave.
oh wow, that's scary.
Scary.
I will keep it for you, okay?
Please just don't fly it into my face.
That's how you get the panoramic shots, Harold.
Yes, let's get that panoramic shot. So on my drone, I've got some guards. Fly it inside, but I've never been raped up. So you got that? Okay.
Yeah. You gotta tell me what. No, that was you gotta tell me.
You wanted to go to school? Yeah. You had to dock fetch.
When you get home, get it out.
I don't know about you guys, but Titus is a hard book to find because it's so small. I always skip it. I'm like, okay, we're back in 1 John. That's too far. Back in Corinthians, that's way too far. All right, we are going to be continuing in Titus chapter 1 this morning. For the most part, we read through Titus chapter 1 last week. We're going to read a little bit more here today, but we were discussing kind of the bulk of chapter 1 hanging out in verses 5 through, I guess, 9.
Oh, yeah, I'll get myself some.
I'll turn it on after. We're in the bulk of Titus chapter 1, verses 5 through 9. Talking about probably one of the most important things for the church, right? Talking about leadership. Talking about elders. And the reason I think that it's appropriate to say one of the most important things is, what do we do if we don't have leadership? It's kind of like if you're on a train without a conductor, you only got two choices, right? You find somebody that can drive the train, or you bail. And so, when you're in the church, you want a conductor, you want a leadership, and that way you don't hopefully have to make that call of, do I put somebody that might be able to drive the ship, or the train was my analogy, or do I bail? And we don't ever want people to be put in that place. So leadership is super, super important. And so that's why it's talked about in the book of Acts. That's why it's talked about to Timothy. That's why it's talked about to Titus. And I think Dennis's, he's not here today, but Dennis's conversation point that he gave last week, and he's given on some Wednesdays before, of every city is the command here in Titus. I think that's kind of an interesting one because he's talking about small congregations within the big congregation in cities. And I don't know if that's true or not, but we don't have that blessing either way, right? We don't have multiple congregations, I think how we would classify it in a city. Although, one of Dennis's other points, because I reread his little paper on that this week, was, maybe that could apply to us in counties. And that could be for us. So if we, maybe we should follow a model more closely to counties leaders. I don't know. But I just found that interesting. You're welcome to ask Dennis about that a little bit more, because he's kind of done some research on it. I think it's really, really important. Some good stuff. Kevin, would you make sure my volume's up in here?
Well,
They
they
can't
asked to
hear.
turn it down.
They can't teach if it's up too high. Because the kids get distracted.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, why don't you guys in the back row? I got a
We
whole
can
front
hear
row
you.
right here.
We
Come
can
here.
hear you just
I
fine.
won't spit.
That's not the problem. Sorry. We can hear.
Rob's even got his hearing aids in.
Is that you, Rod?
Yeah. I did notice you had them in this morning. No,
Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't.
All right, guys, we were talking about the description of elders. I've tried to make the case that this is really important, and I hope you have the same conviction about that, but we were talking about people try and call these the requirements. I like to call them the description. Requirements is not the heading there. The reason I like to use description is kind of one of the points that we brought up last week is this should be what all Christians look like. And of course our leaders should look like this. So this is why I think description is a good word, right? This describes who these people are. It's not the job description, it's the person description, talking about their character. And so last week, we talked about some of the ones that we get caught up on sometimes in verse 4, or not 4, 6, sorry. The ones we usually get caught up in our modern days are the husband of one wife, children who are believers. Those are usually the ones we use to disqualify people because of requirements, but they're also kind of subjective, right? We talk about what does that mean? You can go look at the Greek and it doesn't really help you there because we've got a modern context. So sometimes we're over there saying, is believing children apply to grown children? Well, are they still children or are they adults? Sometimes we say husband of one wife, meaning you can't be a widower. Some people would say that's absolutely ridiculous. I tend to fall into that camp of that's absolutely ridiculous. It's not your fault or any sin's fault that your wife died in most cases. So there could be an exception there in most cases, right? So then we get to verse 7, because we talked about through verse 6 for the most part. So we're still talking about shepherds, pastors, overseers, whatever version you have. You might have different words there. Verse 7 says, "For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain." We started talking about last week the idea of above reproach. And again, just my personal, how I'd understand that is accusations can't stick, right? Because people know the character of this person beyond any accusations that may come. That's how I view above reproach. These other ones are a lot of kind of the behind the scenes things that people don't like to see or expose or even know about, right? Arrogant or quick-tempered. That's not exactly something that's on a form anywhere you can fill out, is it? It's kind of like pride. This, we're called as Christians not to have the sin of pride and to be too self-conceited, or maybe the sin of envy. These are very similar. Arrogance or quick-temperedness are sometimes very behind the scenes and hidden. I think these two ones really point out that in order for somebody to shepherd sheep, they have to be known. They have to be known among the sheep, right? How can you know if somebody's arrogant or quick-tempered if you don't really know who they are as a person? And so I think we kind of struggle with that in our modern context when we talk about shepherds or leaders, because we think very politically. We think about electing people, and we think less about a shepherd who lives among the sheep. That's exactly the context that Titus was being taught here, is a shepherd that lives among the sheep. That's exactly the context Jesus is talking about when he looked upon the Jews and he said, they're like a sheep without a shepherd. He didn't mean it as a power move, but he meant it as there's nobody there that knows them and they don't know the shepherd. And so that analogy is used all throughout Scripture. So if you would let me give my commentary on that, I think something we can take away from arrogant and quick-tempered is you got to be a shepherd among the sheep, or else you can't be a shepherd at all. And I don't know. We have a really tricky culture. We've abandoned a lot of biblical ideals, and that probably one of them. The other ones are a little more straightforward, right? A drunkard, or violent, or greedy for gain. Some of those might be a little more obvious, but also can be hidden. Why do you think it would be a bad situation to have someone leading the sheep who's any of those last three that I just read? A drunkard, violent, or greedy for gain?
They wouldn't have the right look on things, so their gain would be personal. Or if you're drunkard or violent, people aren't going to listen to you. They're not going to want to be approaching by you. They're not going to believe what you say. They're going to take it through the wind and say, they don't know what they're talking about. They can't show this. Or personal gain from finances. You're not going to trust to give your tithing to the church if you don't know where it's going, or if you feel like they're using it unjustly, so you're going to have less finances.
They don't have the right, I don't remember exactly what you said, but the right headspace. Is that a fair one to say?
Right.
So all three of those, right?
Headspace.
Plus, if they're drunken or violent, that can lead to trauma.
Yeah. Nobody
You
wants
can't
to
drive sheep. You can't, sheep aren't like cattle where you can whack them and drive them. You have to lead sheep from the front, and they have to trust the shepherd.
That's kind of tying into Haley's comment there,
You have
right?
to be by example.
Yep.
I like one of the first things Christy said there, and I don't know if I'm saying it exactly right, but the right headspace, right? How can you lead if you can't even be in the right space yourself? Dave?
The characteristics of you talk about the drunkenness and violence, the personality, in my experience, they don't have the other traits that would be needed, because you, generally speaking, don't see both of those in the same person.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right? It's really hard. Sometimes you can fake it, but it's really hard to have.
They might fake it, but it's a lie.
Go ahead.
Okay,
I
thank you. Yeah, it's I got you, Courtney. It's a lie. Yeah, it's really hard to be above reproach when you're violent or drunk. right? Or even greedy. I think all three of those would be very, very applicable. So all three of those, Courtney's next. I got you, babe. All three of those are kind of in the wrong headspace. Very selfish too, right? Focus instead of leading the sheep. If you're drunk or violent or greedy for your own gain, that last one really points it out, right? How can you be thinking of the sheep? You're too focused on yourself. And so you're totally consumed with yourself. And what, like Terry pointed out, the sheep follow the shepherd. They're not driven like cattle. They are led.
Well, you don't want somebody who's going to be in that position leading anyways, because then all the rest of the followers are going to take and say it's okay. And so going to church, you're trying to improve your self-worth or your body or your health or get some spiritual health care. And if you're following somebody that is not living in that right health care type, it'd be like going to the doctor that is always giving you medicine for stuff that they take, not healing.
Courtney? I got you.
It shows who your master is, and I mean, these are things you should strive for at anybody in the church, right? But, I mean, it shows your master is either spirits, or power, or your own temper. And it says, instead, be self-controlled. And I think that's something we all can learn.
And my brother actually dealt with that when he was at church in Fort Lauderdale. He did a business deal with an elder who cheated him out of $10,000. And that had a lasting effect on my brother. Not only that it was a brother in Christ, but an elder in the church who would never admit that he had deliberately, lied on a contract and cheated.
I bet he didn't want to go to church after that.
Pretty much not.
Yep. And his faith, though.
I had somebody else tell me something very similar last week or the week before, basically saying, hey, you're not alone in some of this, what we call ridiculous stuff, right? Like, that's a ridiculous thing. You would never think that happened. But he was like, one of my elders, pretty much as soon as I got here, within the first month, got a DUI. And it was like, wait a minute. And he said it was really hard because I wasn't really being listened to when it came to the fact of, well, he can't shepherd. He can't be in that role, right? And so, oftentimes I think we focus a lot on why this can't be instead of focusing on the need. And so that's why I really like, again, I call these descriptions. We need to have leadership, but the leaders need to be people that are truly Christian. I mean, these are Christian traits, right? And so the bigger question is, because often churches will start talking about, well, it's kind of what we're talking about too, is we have to have this leadership. And then sometimes the answer is, well, we don't have anybody meeting the description. And that's a bigger problem. Because what are we doing here, right? And so you need both. Either way, I mean, you're falling short on something that should definitely be the driving factor of the church. Jordan, did you have something? You were just looking at me. No? Okay.
I'm just looking.
Good. Good. All right, so those are kind of like what not to be, but look at verse 8. They are to be hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. All of these kind of point to the character of who they are, but they're slightly different. They're not very different, right? But they're slightly different. Hospitable, we probably say more like, welcoming. Does that mean that they have to have people in their home all the time? No, it's about their character, right? Their character of they're welcoming to somebody. A lover of good. How do we define a lover of good? Anybody have a different version that reads that a little differently?
Mine says one who loves what is good.
Very similar. So a lover of good. One who loves what is good. Love. We say love in our culture a lot. It means a lot more than we usually use it for, but let's just use it in our culture. I love ramen noodles. It's a delicious snack. 35 cents, can't go wrong. I love coffee. I love my wife and my daughter. In any of those situations, loving means that I desire. Even if it's ramen noodles or coffee, I really desire. They're good. So if you love good, even in the weakest term of love, you desire it, right? And so I think oftentimes we can see people who are fine with good, but they desire it. They want to chase after it. They love it.
Which Greek word is here used here, though?
You're going to have to make me pull out the phone.
Agape or,
It's not agape, if I remember right. My laptop's back there, so I'm sorry. We're no longer in 1 Timothy or 2 Timothy. We're in Titus, verse 8.
Because to a Greek, I love my wife and I
One
love
word.
ramen noodles would be two different words.
It's conjugated with phileo.
Yeah, it's a full word, so or lover of good is one word. And the word is philagos? Sure. We're going to try that. And it's
Brotherly.
philos and eglathos. So philos is like
Brotherly love.
friendly, brotherly love, right? And then the other part is the part I'm having, good. So those two pieces together. So brotherly love. And so I think that fits a little more with what I'm saying. It's not agape, but rather it's the chasing after, right? The friendship of. I think that's a good term. Not just okay with, but friends of. Good. Does that make sense? I think that's an important thing to point out. Hospitable, lover of good, self-controlled. That one really plays into the three we just talked about at the end of verse 7, right? All of those ones would be surrendering self-control. Upright plays a lot into the idea of being above reproach, meaning that they really can't be accused because we know that they do right. It doesn't stick. Holy. That's not a loaded 4-letter word, is it? Yeah, that's right, 4 letters. That's a big word. I think in our modern church culture, sometimes we don't like to use that word because it actually carries too much power, right? We come here as the saints to assemble. Why? Because we're set apart and holy. That's the reason church happens. That sounds a little mean in our culture. But holy means what? Serving to live. What's that?
Set apart.
Set apart. Serving to live for God because you've been called out. You've been set apart. It's a big word. You kind of can't over-define it because there's always more holiness to be done. And discipline. Also tying into the last few of chapters, or verse 7. Discipline. Paul talks about discipline as beating oneself, beating one's own body as you're running the race and training, right? So you can apply that to how can you lead the sheep if you're not willing to discipline yourself? Did you have one?
Maybe a little.
Yeah. Go for it.
Just on that concept of holy, and like Dennis has said many times, like as much as we want to be humble and recognize, like the cheapest of sinners is right here in this chair that I'm sitting in, right? And we want to know that Christ died for something, and it was me, and I need to change, right? At the same time, this word holy, and Dennis talks about the word righteous. Like all throughout Proverbs, it talks about the fool and the righteous man. And so, as much as those lines are kind of blurred in our culture, there's a difference in the Bible between someone who is unrighteous and who is righteous.
Absolutely.
And sometimes we forget that, and I mean, it's not as much as a badge as a call. The call to be righteous, to change, to be self-disciplined, to work on yourself constantly. I mean, it's worth thinking about, because I think that is holy is a word that we can achieve. I mean, not Jesus, but through his grace, more like him.
I'm not trying to give away the sermon, but we're going to talk about that a little bit because Jesus taught it, and we've been going through Jesus' teachings. So that's all I'll say about that. All right, verse 9. We read it, but I think verse 9 is one that's easily skipped over, but it's really important because it's the why. Why do you need these shepherds? Why do they need to be described as a good Christian, you know? Why can't you just pick anybody off the street? Here's why. Verse 9. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, and also rebuke those who contradict it. I don't know, I think it was Dennis, unless I'm mixing it up, but maybe it was somebody else. We were talking about this over the last week. Why do we need the shepherds? So they can combat false doctrine with the sound doctrine, right? He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught. They must not only know, not only read, not only consume the word, but they must hold fast to it. Not, I don't know. They're like, this is the truth. And why do they need to be this is the truth? So that they can be able to give instruction. So they need to be able to teach the truth of the word, but also they need to be able to rebuke those who contradict it. So what's being pointed out here is part of the role of shepherd is not only, caring about people. I think we think about that a lot, right? Like go visit people in their homes, go visit people in the hospital. Probably the biggest job that's described here in Titus is they got to stand up for the word. They got to tell people when they're talking baloney about the word, and they got to instruct and teach what the truth of the word is. That's probably one that we're like not as familiar with because we're a little intimidated by that. Dustin?
I don't really have too much in common, but I was actually thinking this very same thing as we were passing the Mormon church on the way here this morning.
Oh, yeah. You don't think their elders are doing that? You guys know my theory. Maybe not all of you do if you don't come on Wednesdays, but my theory about the Mormons. They take biblical terms and they kind of steal them and then make them something different. And that's really tricky because it sounds right? You're like, hey, this is an elder, this is a tabernacle, this is a temple. They're the Church of Jesus Christ. All of those things seem totally legit until you realize they've taken a word defined in Scripture and redefined it over here as something else. And I think that's tricky. I get frustrated. Courtney can tell you. I get frustrated a lot because they're really working hard to steal our name. They're rebranding as, they're no longer Mormon. They're the Church of Jesus Christ. I'm like, that's too close, Don't steal that from us. So, there you go. That's my thing about Mormons. That's the whole point of shepherds, though. Shepherd the flock, but most importantly, to shepherd them in sound doctrine. Why? Because there will be lots of other doctrines that flow on in. If you don't have people watching out for what might slip on in, pretty soon you're no longer following the sound teachings of Christ. And if you don't have anybody willing to rebuke when false doctrines are being shared, that's going to be what people think is the true doctrine. And if you don't have people teaching the true doctrine, they're not going to know what's up from down or right from wrong. And so that's the job of the shepherd. Even though I say that as the preacher, right? That's the job of the shepherd. That's pretty powerful. Makes a lot more sense why shepherds are talked about, elders are talked about like they should be paid and like it's a real important job and things like that. We've belittled it quite a bit. All right, anything else through verse 9? Questions about that? Comments? All right, let's go ahead and finish out the chapter. I don't recall if we read it or not. But this kind of ties into verse 9. 10 through the end. For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain when they ought not to teach. One of the Cretians, a prophet of their own, said, Cretians are always liars, evil beasts, and lazy gluttons. This testimony is true. Therefore rebuke them sharply that they may be sound in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and commands of people who turn away from the truth. To the pure all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving nothing is pure. But both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny them by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. This is kind of the reason why I continued from verse 9 into verse 10, getting a little specific to Timothy's situation, right? We probably don't have people from the circumcision party that are causing the false doctrines coming into Riverton Wyoming church, right? We don't have many Cretans standing up there preaching for, the paycheck and kind of making political call-outs for the paycheck. That's kind of what the Cretans are doing. But what do we have? Probably not the circumcision party, probably not the Cretans, but we have these same sort of things that need to be watched out for, right? The first one that is pointed out is the insubordinate, empty talker, and deceiver. There's still those type of people. They still come into the church. They still talk empty talk, man. That one's really, I think that one's, we focus on deceivers a lot. They speak falsely. But what about empty talkers? It's not actually backed up. It's just, I don't know, just this is what I think. Not what the Bible has to say, right? This is what I think. Empty talk. Has no backing behind it. And insubordinate. Insubordinate to what? The other church members? I don't think so. I think insubordinate's more referring to this sound doctrine. This was talked about in verse 9. They're not obeying the truth that they are held to if they're really a Christian. They're not following the rules. They're insubordinate. And we don't like to talk about rules, but we have a higher calling. So we have more than rules. Verse 11. They must be silenced, for they're upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. In other words, people can be hurt by false teaching. Surprise? But I mean, no, that makes a lot of sense. Whole families can be hurt. And so the call of the shepherd, the call of the overseer, the call of the elder is to rebuke these people. And verse 18, verse 16, well, hold on, bring this closer to my face. Verse 16. Verse 16 just kind of shows Titus exactly what to be looking for, because they profess to know God, but they deny him in their works. I think Christians for generations upon generations struggle with this idea, okay, it's not about works, but yeah, it totally is, right? We're not saved by our works, but yet the works are expected. And what is being pointed out to Titus about those who should shepherd and those who should no longer be a part of the body is they might sound good, but you will know that they deny God by how they practice their works. It's like the fruit and the tree situation that Jesus talks about. Jordan and then Terry.
I just wanted to read Romans chapter 6, verse 20. And this is tying into what you're saying. Paul's talking to the church in Rome. For when you were slaves of sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. Right? You had no regard for it. Right? It didn't dictate how you lived your life. Verse 21. But what fruit were you getting at the time from the things which you are now ashamed? So, what does that say about a Christian walking? Right? What did your fruits produce when now you're ashamed of them? Because what you were doing when you were still believing was shameful. And you grew from that and you didn't fall after those fruits, because Paul goes on to say the fruits lead to death. That just ties a lot into Titus to me.
Yeah.
The way it's said.
You're not proud of the rotten fruit you produced before, but rather you said, hey, I got healthier, I got pruned, I got some fertilizer, here I am producing fruit now. Not that rotten junk before.
Do we profess to know God and completely deny Him when we leave Sunday morning? What we do, who we hang out with, how we live our life, how we raise our family?
Yeah, rotten fruit is sometimes more prevalent than we wish to admit, isn't it? And that's why we need not only accountability between brothers and sisters, but this whole section about leadership, and in 1 Timothy as well, is about this is why you need it, right? To watch out for the flock and to help people have either good fruit or get out of here because you're not in the vineyard, right? And so that's really, really important. Terry?
I think we have to be careful too when it talks about dishonest gain, that entire churches have set up things that sound like a really good idea. I know there are religions where you can pay to have prayers done for the dead so that you can pray your relatives out of hell.
And you can pay for that. And people will do prayers and light candles for them. It sounds nice. It sounds like, but it is not biblical. And yet nobody really questions that. They don't question the honesty of that because it sounds like such a good thing.
There's
And I
a
think we
lot
have
of
to be-
false teachers.
Yeah, I think we have to worry about, I think we have to be very careful about those kind of things. We think that was them, not us, and yet that's not true.
Absolutely.
I mean, the simplest thing to bounce off of Terry, there's churches that you can pay or join their fellowship. So you actually have to be baptized to the church itself, not to God. And a lot of people believe that that's what you should do, when really the bigger picture is your relationship with God, not I mean, yes, the relationship in the church is very important with each other, but there's a lot of churches that want you to be baptized or go through like a commencement ceremony to belong to the church, and then you're forever a part of them. And that's not a true teaching. It's pretty false, but it's very big. Very, very big.
And that one's usually really hard to catch because it's a simple little phrase, right?
Oh, yeah.
To be baptized into the church of
Latter-day Saints or
Baptist, whatever.
Baptist or, Catholic is...
And we've even fallen into that at times within our movement, right? You're baptized into the church of Jesus Christ, the church.
Right.
Big church.
Right.
Capital C. Not a place or even a sect. And we've fallen into that. And so the reason I wanted to point that out is I think it's easy for us to look at other Christian-like groups, whether they're Christian or not. But these false teaching things can creep into what we think is safe. We think, if you got the right sign on the building, you're safe, or you come from the right movement in America, you're safe, or here in this building, you're safe. No, we're not safe, right? And that's why we need the leadership, the shepherds, to watch out for the flock, because nobody is safe from Satan and his workers. Whether they come in with simple false teachings or they come in with a long game where they just slowly make you think something that goes against Scripture.
So to counter on that, when you say you shouldn't go to people's houses or you don't have to go to someone's house for fellowship or opening doors, for me, I love the little notes I get. If Christy doesn't come all the time, she gets something in the mail. But wouldn't it be much better if some of the people, not just me, because I know I can show up, but to check in, to actually shoot a message from people hey, how you doing? Do you need anything? Is there not necessarily from you, but that's one thing I've noticed. I'll get the thing in the mail, and I'm not saying this because I need encouragement to show up. I'm just saying for those that don't show up, or those that we miss after some time, or we don't know their struggles, if they're sick, if they're ill. That's part of that elders piece I feel you're talking about, that Jordan can send Riley home and be Riley, tell your mom we miss her. Or Jordan can come back. Sorry, Jordan, you're just in my
Jordan.
eyesight.
Jordan, you're an elder, man. Get over it.
They're climbing on my back.
Yeah, no, or Courtney, or Barb, or Esther, or any one of us can check in on the women in a different way, or the men. And I know the men do the breakfast and the women have theirs, but sometimes life passes us by that I know that for other members of the church, it would be nice, especially because we don't always know if they're sick. We don't know what's going on. To just, send that encouraging message hey, how's everything going? Is there a need that you have? Can we help? So that, I feel in that elders talk that you have, and it's not just the men, it's not just the women, it's our church as a whole, to make sure, that we're all okay. And that's that fellowship piece that kind of bounces off what everybody's talking about, I feel
And that's why when you look at the description, it's very much okay, this is just a person that is following the path of Christianity description, right? But Christy's also pointing out the pain that you can feel when you're lacking the actual shepherds, right? And so, this is a job for everybody to do, but a shepherd is dedicating everything to doing exactly that, because they've been, there's opinions on this, but I'm going to say they've been called by the Holy Spirit, okay? That's in Scripture. Some people have opinions about it. They've been called by the Holy Spirit to make that their life. And so Christy's given a good example of when you lack following that biblical example, you can start to feel the lacking of it, right? And it's not to hate on the congregation that the congregation doesn't do a good job of it. It's just we have the description of how that can definitely be taken care of.
Because I know like before, because if I didn't come in, like Craig would definitely, you know, hey, is everything okay? And it wasn't the elders devoted to it, it was the people of the church that just noticed the presence and the absence and, you know, how do we not bring them in and drag them here? And but I can say from the truth, like not coming, you don't live as such of a life that you should, that you follow, but having the people check on you to encourage you to come, because then you feel whole, you feel a part. And when you don't feel that, you're like, I'm not going. That's a mess. But when you start to get, you know, more people checking in, then I just feel like you feel more belonged.
You don't have to tell me about it, I'm the preacher and I feel it.
Yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
it's hard.
Terry?
I totally agree with what Christy's saying, but the truth of the matter is, we don't have elders in Riverton, and we don't have men who are qualified, which means all of us need to be following these characteristics so that we can grow into the point in which we go, you know, these men really are acting as elders, they should be elders officially. Because, you know, we can talk about this all we want, but the truth of the matter is if we're not living that and growing, each one of us, in all of these things, we're never going to have elders.
And that's the whole reason that I want to teach this. Not that it was taught to Titus or Timothy, right? But I really struggle with why are we here right now? And what Terry just said, we don't have anybody qualified. That's really strange to me, right? And the second part that she said is, the reason that we need to, if I can be so bold, we need to agree this is should be our goal. Because if we don't agree that this should be our goal, we're never going to have people qualified, if you want to use that term. And, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm saying, man, spent a lot of years here. Has this not been the goal? Because you're absolutely right. There could be young people in here that in a couple of years could definitely fill this role. But if it's not our goal, we're not going to hold each other accountable to fill that role. And so, I mean, we're talking, in about 20 years, this church is probably going to have a 100-year anniversary. Am I right on that? Talking, so maybe 30 years, 1955, somewhere in there. 100 years. If we could have our first elders in 100 years, that would be like, wow, that was 100 years, right? So maybe could we have them in 85? Because we are doing exactly what Terry's talking about. All right, Kylie, Jordan, I think both of you guys had your hands up, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off of what Terry said because the title of this is Qualifications of Elders, and I think it really opened my eyes because when I've read this before, my mind is just focused on, okay, this is for elders. Not, that's just where my mind goes, but then rereading it and seeing, okay, if we're not all doing this, whether elders, deacons, preacher, members of the church, then it goes back to what Terry said, so.
Yeah, how can you have them if you're not working towards this goal, right? And I think that's the most important thing. And so I would, if I could do anything to help us, it would be to help us have this goal. Because I'm a little concerned that right now this goal doesn't even exist, right?
The goal of having an elder, or just be like our church changing in the direction of all being shepherds?
The goal of having shepherds officially.
Like
'Cause
all of us doing
yeah.
the checking in and like as a whole, because it should come from
I mean,
everybody, it shouldn't be one.
if we feel like we haven't met that goal, that's step number one. Like, I mean, but either way, I'm also, let me tell you this, I'm driven by goals. Not everybody is, okay, I understand that. But I'm driven by goals. If you don't give me something that I'm failing at because I have to work at it ahead, I feel like a failure. That makes no sense, right? But that's how Harold thinks. And so just give you that Harold perspective on things. And I'm realizing more and more over the recent years that not everybody thinks like that. They don't understand why you want goals and expectations, but that's how I was raised. And so that's how I roll. All right, Jordan?
I was just going to say, I certainly don't feel, I'll be honest, I don't feel super qualified to speak in anybody's life. you know? I don't have a close relationship like, I'll pick on Harold. I don't have a close relationship like I have with Harold with everyone else, right? Like if you put me and Harold in a pickup truck, Harold will say, I ask him hard questions. And Harold's like, thanks for being willing to do that. But Harold and I have built that relationship, right? My wife and I have a relationship. And like a majority of us here, at least I feel, there's a wall. You know, maybe what you said was cool. I like that. You know, but if you're comfortable and open with that, I'd be willing to text you. But it's that way with everybody. You know, they don't want me in their life.
And it
That's the
shouldn't
way
be
that I
way.
feel. There's a wall up, and you're not getting through it. If I'm not here on Sunday, then don't bother me.
Right, right.
Don't you dare try to talk to my wife.
Well, and that's where
how I
I'm
feel.
like, I feel like we have to change that because we're losing so much good from each other. Like if Barb didn't check on me sometimes, or if Sherry didn't, or you can. I'm totally okay with you saying, where the heck are you at?
A lot of people don't like me pointing the finger out.
But that, you know why they don't like it? Because I can testify to that. They don't like it because you're right. It's not because you've done something to offend them, but if I don't come, I'm way okay with somebody asking, because then I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, I dropped my kid off so I could go to the store when nobody's at the store. It's the best thing on Sunday. But am I really getting what I should be, or should I be coming here to learn, you know? So speaking just for me, go ahead, you know, and I feel like a lot of people feel that way, but they don't want to admit it.
As a loving brother or sister, are you really gonna be pointing the finger at somebody? Aren't you just checking in to make sure she's okay? I mean, I agree. I would not want to get a text from you that said, why weren't you there on
Where
Sunday?
were you, Terry?
That's right. But I would love to get a text that says, hey, we missed you. Is there anything we can do? Is everything okay? You know, neither of you were there. And that's not pointing the finger.
But sometimes it is pointing the finger, because, you know, casting out sound doctrine, rebuke them sharply, that's,
Yeah.
sounds a little bit like a, so I do think sometimes, and
But that should come from somebody who has that kind of relationship with them. You guys do. Jordan could come to you and say, hey, I need to talk to you about this. So
And it's-
Or
we
we
need
build
to
better
develop those kind of
relationships with each
relationships.
other while we're here.
Bingo.
And we get rid of some of the walls and get our fears out there and sit at the different table at potluck or sit next to someone else at church, you know, figure out. It comes from us though. Like, we
And you-
can only do so much and talk about it.
Donna's got one, and I'm not gonna make her raise her hand again, I'm just gonna hold it for a second. You know, some of that, it seems really surface level, Christy just said, you know, potlucks and things like that, but there's deeper things, you gotta be honest. If you tell somebody that you're a brother, you've gotta be willing to tell them when they're off the path, and you gotta be willing to accept when they're off the path. And part of what Christy said, well, at least for me, I'm willing to take that. Obviously, not everybody is, because you really got to be a brother or not, or sister. I'm not just using the colloquial term, right? And so I think what Jordan is pointing out is you can maybe have some of those medium ones, and then some of them you just get completely shut down. I mean, there's no accountability, there's no brotherhood, and it's like, man, what do you do with that? Well, you keep trying, but at a point, you're going to focus on the ones that can guide you and you can guide them, to maybe become somebody who could be an elder.
I'll quickly before Donna goes. I was gonna say it's a two-way street. You know, you gotta pick your tool. What are you gonna use? You gonna use the sledgehammer to knock the wall down, or are we gonna use the pitchfork to chase after a preacher, or are we gonna text somebody about a rumor? You know, I mean, we gotta pick. What are you gonna do? If we're gonna break down walls and be a family, then do it.
We have to.
We have to.
Because
Yeah,
we're
there's no other
struggling as a
choice.
whole. And what I see coming in periodically, we're not where we should be.
Absolutely. And it's gonna hurt. And eventually you won't have to tear down walls because the whole place burned down, you just have to rebuild it. Right?
No, that's not.
Yeah. All right, Donna, we kept you marinating.
Well, some of it has been said, and I just want to expand just a little bit. I mean, we're not comfortable with people that we don't know. So guess what? Don't we think we need to get to know them? And the more we know them, the more comfortable we are, and the more that we can share. And the other part of that, though, is I would like to challenge everybody to call, text,